Yes, you, watching this video. Do you want to own a piece of Scribbler? Only not a lock of hair or blood or flesh or anything else that will get you in trouble with the law? Well, now you can, with t-shirts, hoodies, tote bags and mugs featuring Obab Scribbler at her Teespring store. You know you want to. I shall now stop talking in third person and send you on to the video. Be lovely to each other and enjoy the show.
Big Macintosh took a long draught of cider from his mug before letting out an easy sigh. He looked out over the verdant orchards of Sweet Apple Acres, admiring the soft light of the setting sun reflecting off the yellow, orange, and gold leaves of autumn. Bright red fruits shone brightly in the sunlight, looking like baubles hanging from the rows of trees that stretched out over the hillside. Beside him, Applejack leaned back against a wooden fence post, taking a swig of cider from her own mug. Behind them sat the barn, standing proudly as a symbol of their hard work.
Yup,
Big Mac drawled, an expression which, in this context, and due to its long drawn-out nature and the inflection of his tone, could be roughly translated as, "My word, this is a beautiful day, is it not? Why, it's the sort of day that makes one happy to be alive." Applejack murmured as she held the rim of her mug to her lips, an expression which could be translated as, "I heartily agree, and would also like to express my appreciation for this batch of cider you made. The quality of it is most excellent."
yup.
The Stallion replied, which here meant, "You're most welcome for the cider, my dear sister. I'm happy you're enjoying it while we share this peaceful moment."
Hello?
A male voice called from the other side of the barn.
Anyone here?
Applejack grumbled, casting a frown in the direction of the voice, her expression roughly meaning, "So much for the moment. There's never any peace around here."
Yup.
Big Mac responded with a chuckle, putting down his mug before making his way around the barn. When he reached the other side, he was greeted by the sight of two ponies walking up the path towards him. One was a blue-coated stallion with a dark blue swept-back mane, and the other was a mare with a pale yellow coat and a fiery orange mane. Both were Pegasi.
Sweet Apple Acres.
The stallion read off the sign over the entry gate.
Yeah, this is the place, Spitfire. I'm telling you, they make the best pies.
You and your pies.
The mare, ostensibly named Spitfire, replied, rolling her eyes as she did so.
This had better be a pretty amazing pie for us to come all the way out here.
Hey there!
The stallion called out when he spotted Big Mac, waving vigorously.
Do you have any pies?
Big Mac shook his head as he approached, still keeping a warm smile on his face.
Nope.
Nope!
The Pegasus stallion looked crestfallen, his eyes widening and his jaw dropping in horror.
What do you mean, nope?
I think he means nope, Soarin. As in, no pies to be found here.
Soarin's ears folded against his skull, and he gave Big Mac a hopeful grin.
Well, got anything else?
Big Mac opened his mouth to respond, but another voice answered before he could.
"Come on back tomorrow morning, you hear?"
They turned to see an elderly, green-coated mare standing on the porch of the farmhouse, looking down at them.
"We'll have a fresh batch raising up pies, fritters, and tarts. Help yourself, silly. Just so long, Big Mac remembers to pick up enough flour. Won't you, Big Man?"
Yup.
Tomorrow morning? I can wait that long!
Soarin exclaimed, his expression quickly brightening. He leapt into the air, his wings unfurling as he did so.
Great! I'll be back first thing tomorrow. Come on, Spitz. Let's see if we can find someplace in town to stay. Race you back!
Spitfire faltered, remaining in place on the ground.
That's fine. You go on ahead. In fact, why don't you find that Rainbow Dash kid? I bet she'd be happy to see you.
Yes, ma'am!
Soarin cheered before taking off with such force that all Big Mac saw was a blue streak racing towards town before his own mane blanketed his vision. Once the rush of wind passed, he lifted a hoof to push his hair out of his eyes, and found himself alone with Spitfire, who was watching Soarin vanish over the horizon, shaking her head.
Sorry about him. He can be a little thick sometimes.
She turned to Big Mac and flashed him a small grin.
I mean, don't get me wrong, he's a nice fellow and all, but yeah.
Big Mac shrugged his massive shoulders.
Yup.
The sound of hooves treading on ground met their ears, and they turned to see Applejack approaching, her eyes widening at the sight of Spitfire. The Pegasus gave her a smile, chuckling as she came nearer.
Small world.
I'll say,
Applejack exclaimed.
nice to see you again. How are the Wonderbolts treating you?
No different than usual. Anyway, I've taken enough of your time. I guess I'll be back tomorrow to see these amazing pies of yours.
Ew.
Big Mac's response was cut off by an orange hoof being shoved over his mouth. He turned to see his sister, now standing beside him, now wrapping her forehoof around his shoulders.
Actually, since Big Mac here needs to go into town to pick up some flour, I'm sure he'd be happy to show you around town. Won't you, Big Mac?
Big Mac stammered, even as he felt his sister practically shoving him towards Spitfire.
Oh, I wouldn't want to be a burden.
Nonsense! You're an esteemed guest. And besides, Big Mac was heading into town anyway. He'll show you all the nicest places around.
Yup.
Big Mac murmured, giving Spitfire an awkward grin. The surface of Ponyville Lake was still, mirroring the purples and dark blues of the twilight sky above. The setting sun had retired behind the mountain for the day, but the western sky was still lit in fiery, if fading tones that were reflected in the colours of the mare Big Macintosh was standing beside.
That's really pretty.
Spitfire commented. A long silence descended over them, broken only by the croak of frogs and the buzz of insects flying over the water. A soft breeze passed through the valley, like a gentle sigh, rustling the yellowing leaves in the trees. The creak of a windmill drifted from the nearby town. Spitfire rubbed one of her forelegs with the other, glancing down at the shore of the lake. Big Mac went from looking at Spitfire to looking at the town, to looking out at the lake, his eyes desperately searching for a target that he would not feel uncomfortable looking at.
Sorry,
Spitfire blurted out, finally breaking the silence.
I'm not that good at the small talk. I tend to just give orders. Conversations are more of Soarin's thing.
Big Mac nodded. He pawed at the ground for a moment before opening his mouth. Then he closed it. Then he opened it again. After a few more false starts, he finally articulated the words.
What am I even doing here?
Spitfire sighed, throwing Big Mac a quick glance before continuing.
Sorry, it's just, sometimes I think I must be the biggest idiot in the world. Recruiting season at the academy is over, and I don't have to go on tour for another few days. So I finally get a break from my work, and what do? Let my coworker convince me to tag along with him. So now I get to be reminded of work on my vacation.
She turned to Big Mac, giving him a wry grin.
I must be pretty stupid, right?
The Stallion shook his head, smiling.
Nope.
That's nice of you to say, even if you're completely wrong.
The Pegasus went back to staring out at the lake.
Anyway, I'm sorry to unload that on you. I'm sure you've got better things to do than to listen to me whine all day.
Big Mac put a hoof to his chin, frowning slightly, before smiling and shaking his head.
Nope.
Spitfire let out a loud snicker, quickly covering her mouth with a hoof. It took her a moment to recover, and when she did, she gave the Stallion a broad grin.
I like you. You're easy to talk to. Hey, if you were a Pegasus, you'd probably make a good cadet. Oh, And there I go thinking about work again.
She inhaled deeply before letting her breath out slowly.
So, what do you do around here for fun?
Big Mac considered this for a moment.
Work?
Spitfire raised an eyebrow.
Okay. Anything else?
Another moment of silence passed before Big Mac shook his head.
Nope.
The Pegasus let out a snort, once again collapsing into snickers, and this time joined by the hearty chuckles of Big Mac.
Sounds like you could use a vacation yourself.
She thumped him on the shoulder. It was a mark of her strength that the huge stallion actually felt it.
You know, this really is beautiful.
Spitfire waved a hoof in the direction of the lake. The last rays of the sun were quickly vanishing over the horizon as twilight consumed the sky. She rubbed a hoof over the sandy shore.
I always just thought of lakes as, water. Just water. Once in a while we'd come by and suck some out for Cloudsdale, and that's it. I didn't really think there was more to it than that.
Big Mac nodded, and after some consideration, picked up a small flat rock with his teeth. He drew his head back, then whipped it forward as he let go of the stone, watching with satisfaction as it skipped twice before dropping beneath the surface with a soft plonk.
Nice one. Here, let me try.
Spitfire picked up a rock of her own and threw it in, but it promptly sank into the water with a loud splash.
Ah, shoot.
Here.
Big Mac nudged a small, flat stone towards Spitfire, who took it in her mouth and gave it a strong throw. Her aim was off, though, as she wound up flinging the rock at the shallow water near her hooves. The resulting splash caught her, drenching her face. Spitfire grumbled while Big Mac let out a snort. At a glare from the Pegasus, his face promptly scrunched up, and he avoided her gaze. But after a moment, her stern facade broke, and she let out a snicker of her own before the two broke out into full laughter.
Okay, I'll leave the skipping to you.
Spitfire laughed, shaking the water from her mane.
I'll just throw them in.
At that, she picked up another small rock, this time lobbed it with a forehoof. The two of them watched it sail through the air in a high arc before landing with a tiny splash far out from the shoreline.
Let's see you beat that.
She threw Big Mac a cocky grin. The stallion returned the grin and trotted over to where a stone the size of his fetlock sat, slightly elevated above the surface of the lake. With a great big wind-up, he pulled back one of his hind legs and smashed his hoof into the stone, sending it hurtling over the lake. Spitfire watched, her mouth agape, as the rock landed halfway across the lake, sending up a huge splash and scattering a nearby flock of geese that had otherwise been enjoying a quiet evening. Their angry honks resounded through the air as they took flight for safer environs.
I may not be keeping track, but that's gotta be some kind of record,
she said with awe. Big Mac gave her a satisfied smile. A loud yelp rang out from the opposite shore, accompanied by the familiar honks of geese. In the distance, Spitfire and Big Mac could make out the blue streak of a Pegasus racing through the sky, being pursued by a mass of large, honking birds. Behind them, a distinctly rainbow-coloured streak raced after, yelling something incoherent from this distance.
Uh-oh,
Spitfire muttered, lifting a hoof to cover her sheepish grin before turning to Big Mac.
I think now would be a good time to pick up that flower of yours.
Yup.
Big Mac exclaimed, leading the Pegasus in their flight from the scene of their misdeed, both of them laughing all the way into town.
It's not funny, Spitz.
Soarin grumbled, his face and coat now covered in nicks, scratches, and several small bandages.
I didn't say anything.
Spitfire flashed the blue Pegasus an innocent smile. The two of them were once again standing at the entrance to Sweet Apple Acres, now enjoying the warm morning sunlight on their coats.
Yeah, but you were thinking it.
Soarin idly scratched at one of his bruises. Nearby, Big Mac was assembling the mobile stand the Apple family used to sell their goods, while Applejack and Granny Smith made trips back and forth between the stand and the farmhouse, carting trays of steaming pastries and pies with them.
It's just a good thing Rainbow Dash knew where to find that Fluttershy pony. Who knows what those geeses would have done otherwise?
Soarin suppressed a shudder while Spitfire and Big Mac shared a look before quickly turning away, whistling loudly.
But it's okay.
His mouth watered at the sight of the pies Applejack was carrying on her back.
It'll all be worth it once I taste that wonderful pie.
Soarin, you're drooling again.
He merely gargled in response. Soon, bits passed between hooves, and Soarin was snout deep in fresh apple pie, scarfing it loudly and moaning with pleasure through bulging mouthfuls of piping hot apple filling. Applejack watched on uneasily for a moment before leaning towards Spitfire.
See, okay.
Oh, this is nothing. You should have seen him at the Cloudsdale custard competition. He nearly passed out on the spot.
It's good.
Soarin mumbled between bites, his face still buried within the depths of the pie tin.
Well, glad you like it.
Applejack chortled before turning to her brother.
Alrighty, Big Mac. Your turn to take the stand into town.
Yep.
He harnessed himself to the front of the stand while Applejack secured the last of the treats inside. He was just about to start for town when he noticed Spitfire standing beside him.
This might sound weird, but
She cleared her throat and leaned closer, speaking in hushed tones.
do you think I could tag along with you? I just want to get away from Soarin for a bit.
The noisy sounds of wolfing down pie filled the air, and there were still several untouched pies sitting on the ground that the blue Pegasus had yet to touch.
He's gonna be like this for a while.
Big Mac chuckled before giving Spitfire a wide grin.
Yep.
Wonderbolt's autographs. Meet Captain Spitfire. Free autograph with purchase of apple pastry. Big Mac was astonished. It had all started out simply enough. He had set up shop in the middle of the square and, just like always, got a few regulars who were used to the cart's presence. But then Spitfire, seeing an opportunity to bring in some business, raced into a costume shop on the edge of the square and emerged a moment later wearing a full Wonderbolt's outfit. Suddenly, the attention of every pony in the square was on them, and Spitfire was barking out orders.
Line up here on the right. Single file, no pushing, no shoving, falls to the front. Buy your apple treats here on the right, then get in line for autographs on the left. Hey, you with the mohawk, no cutting in line, single files, ponies.
Hey, wait a minute.
Called out a green stallion with red hooves and a blonde mane, who was pointing at Spitfire.
Those aren't captain stripes on your uniform. The captain has 2 yellow stripes and a red stripe, not 3 yellow ones.
He placed a hoof on his chest and offered the crowd a smug grin.
Every true Wonderbolts fan knows that.
Spitfire yanked off her mask and glared down at the stallion, revealing a face that would have been instantly familiar to any pony who read a recent issue of Wonderbolts Weekly.
I left my actual outfit at home, and this is the best I could do on short notice. Now, do you want your stupid autograph or not?
The stallion gulped and withered before her gaze.
Yes, ma'am.
On a normal day, the Sweet Apple Acre stand would have still had a few unsold leftovers even after being open all morning. On this day, it sold out within 15 minutes. Big Mac hurried to serve the growing crowd of ponies, watching in amazement at the growing pile of bits beneath the counter.
And there!
Spitfire announced, stamping her inked hoof on a photograph of herself for the last pony in line. The pony in question grabbed it and raced away, squealing loudly as she did so. Spitfire glanced at the clock tower in the distance.
20 minutes! That's a new record!
Yup.
Looks like you made a good haul there.
Spitfire pointed at the small mountain of gold bits that Big Mac was scooping up into several burlap sacks.
Just be grateful there aren't any trademark lawyers to see that.
Big Mac raised an eyebrow at this, and Spitfire leaned toward him, speaking in a hushed tone.
Well, strictly speaking, we're not allowed to charge for our own autographs, at least not without permission from our sponsors. And they wouldn't be willing to give it to us anyway, because they have exclusive rights to all of our autographed merchandise.
Oh.
Yeah, it's all nonsense.
She leaned back in her seat.
Just be grateful if you can go on your whole life without meeting Patton Suit. That guy is an asshole.
Spitfire and Big Mac jumped at the sound of a voice coming from behind them, and turned to see a middle-aged, grey-coated stallion with flat greying hair, thick-rimmed glasses, and a very severe expression on his face. Rather than a saddlebag, he wore a briefcase on his side, and on his flank was the mark of a sheaf of documents.
Hi, Patton.
Spitfire's tone suddenly turned very high-pitched.
Nice to see you again. I was just talking about how you're such an astounding gentle cult.
Peyton's eyes narrowed as he gazed over the bridge of his glasses at Spitfire, and Big Mac suddenly felt himself shiver uncontrollably, and his blood run cold, even though he had no idea what was truly going on.
Two-week suspension?
In retrospect, Big Mac felt he should have known it was too good to be true. The encounter with Patent Suit had ended with him confiscating every bit they had made, for evidence, and with Spitfire receiving a citation. And while losing what amounted to roughly 2 days' worth of income had been bitterly disappointing, Big Mac's frustration was nothing compared to Spitfire's, who was currently ripping her citation to shreds.
2-week suspension? Me? Who do they think they're dealing with? I'm the captain of the Wonderbolts.
She hurled the shreds of paper to the ground.
I worked for years to get where I am now. I'm not some celebrity or stunt flyer they get to just push around.
She yanked off the Wonderbolt costume she was wearing, forcefully tugging at its folds, before balling it up and hurling it at a nearby dumpster. However, it unfurled in mid-air and lost momentum, instead coming to a rest atop the head of a grey-coated, blonde-maned Pegasus, who happened to be fluttering past at that very moment. She paused to pull the blue fabric and look at it for a moment, before gasping with delight and racing off.
I swear I hate this job sometimes!
Spitfire threw her forehooves into the air. She paused in the middle of the street to bury her face in her hooves and let out a muffled scream. Big Mac stood at her side for an uncomfortable moment, looking around uneasily, before slowly lifting a forehoof and patting the Pegasus on the shoulder. He gently pressed his hoof against her coat, feeling the tension of her muscles slowly ease. Finally, she sighed and stood up, looking at Big Mac.
Okay, I don't hate my job. In fact, there's a lot of stuff I really love about it. It's just all this paperwork and contract stuff just drives me nuts. They didn't tell me about that back at the academy.
Yup.
Well, I guess it could be worse. The academy doesn't come back into session for another month, so the suspension won't affect me there. But now I'm gonna miss the first round of races.
She paused, then added,
And don't worry, I'll make it up to you for losing those bits.
Big Mac shook his head.
No.
Oh, no. I insist on making up for it. It was my fault you lost them, so it's my responsibility to pay up.
But...
He was interrupted by a yellow hoof being forcefully shoved into his chest.
No buts. I can work for it, and now I've got a 2-week mandatory vacation. I have no reason not to help you out. In fact, I want to help you out.
Spitfire removed her hoof from Big Mac's chest and held it out in front of him.
So what do you say? I won't take no for an answer.
He gazed down at Spitfire's extended hoof, silently considering her. Over the next week, Spitfire would begin each day by waking up at the crack of dawn and flying to Sweet Apple Acres. The captain of the Wonderbolts had taken to sleeping on a nearby cloud at night and helping Big Mac on the farm during the day. Even after Soarin left town for the Wonderbolt shows, with Rainbow Dash in tow as an enthusiastic audience member, Spitfire stayed in Ponyville and continued what had become a daily routine. At first, each morning went the same. Spitfire would arrive at the farm, and Big Mac would insist she had worked off her debt. The Pegasus would insist otherwise, and without any hard figures to back up either of their claims, she would win these arguments by sheer force of personality. So she continued working, aiding the Stallion with whatever he was working on that day. And after a few days, Big Mac stopped protesting.
So let me get this straight. You earth ponies rake up the fallen leaves into piles, and then foals jump into them?
Yup.
Spitfire and Big Mac were standing in one of the many orchards of sweet apple acres, surrounded by the glorious colours of autumn. The bright red fruits, coupled with the many yellows and oranges of the leaves, seemed to reflect the coats of the two ponies present. Though the trees were still full of foliage, many leaves had already fallen to the ground. Spitfire and Big Mac each carried a rake, and several large piles of leaves, about as high as the Wonderbolt Captain was tall, dotted the landscape around them. Spitfire stepped next to one of the piles and picked up one of the leaves with her rake, holding it in front of her face to examine it closely.
I don't see the appeal. They're all brown and crinkly, not soft like clouds. They don't really look like they'd be much fun to jump into.
Big Mac suddenly felt an overwhelming compulsion to illustrate the virtues of jumping headlong into a large pile of leaves. Being a stallion of few words, he knew he would not be able to persuade another pony by oral argument, so he opted for a simpler and more effective approach. He lifted a forehoof and gave Spitfire a quick shove. The Pegasus vanished into the pile, throwing up a cloud of leaves in her wake. Spitfire's head emerged out of the top of the pile, giving Big Mac a stern glare, but the Stallion was laughing too heartily to think anything of it. After a few seconds, a sly grin crossed her face.
Oh, you will pay for that!
Her hooves promptly went to work, struggling to fling hooffuls of leaves at him, but none made it very far through the air before fluttering to the ground, falling far short of Big Mac. This only caused him to laugh harder.
New plan!
Spitfire spread her wings and launched upwards, raining leaves down behind her. A few quick twists and turns through the air was all that was needed to lift the pile into a swirling mass. Big Mac's eyes widened at the sight of a huge vortex of autumn colours bearing straight down on him before he was buried beneath their mass.
Whoa!
A shrug of his shoulders was all that was needed to disturb enough of the pile to clear his vision, and it was to see Spitfire holding a hoof to her mouth, trying to hide her smile, before she gave in and burst out laughing.
Okay, I may have gone a little overboard.
She looked around at the mess of leaves that littered the ground, covering what had previously been freshly raked earth.
Yup.
Big Mac stepped out of the pile and shook off as many leaves as he could. He looked at Spitfire and noticed a brown leaf sticking out prominently in the sweep of her mane.
Here.
He leaned down to grasp the leaf between his teeth and gently pulled it out of her mane without pulling any hairs out by their roots.
Oh, thanks.
Spitfire gave him a sheepish grin before taking a step toward him.
You got one too.
She stood up on her hind legs, planting her forehooves on his broad shoulders to reach up toward his back. Big Mac felt the volume of her mane brush against the side of his face, tickling his cheek. Her teeth tugged at something that had wedged itself in the hairs on the back of his neck. A sudden shiver went down his spine at the feeling of her breath on his coat and her firm hooves pressing into his skin. Her head re-emerged in front of him, her mouth now holding the leaf she had pulled from his mane. Her hooves remained on his shoulders, and their gazes met, their snouts mere inches apart. From this distance, Big Mac could make out every detail of her face, every individual eyelash, every strand of hair that made up the majestic orange sweep of her mane, every little vein in the spiky brown leaf she held between her lips. Spitfire opened her mouth, letting the leaf fall slowly to the ground, forgotten to the two ponies present. A long moment passed in silence before she spoke, never pulling her gaze away from Big Mac's.
That just happened, didn't it?
Big Mac took a few seconds to respond, still holding the stem of his leaf between his teeth.
Yup.
The validity of what they had just experienced confirmed, they stood still for another long moment. Big Mac could feel Spitfire's breath warm upon his snout. Another shiver went down his spine and travelled down his legs, and judging from the way her hooves shook ever so slightly against his shoulders, she was shivering too.
You...
Spitfire paused, closing her mouth and briefly licking her lips.
You don't mind, do you?
Another long moment passed in silence, save for the rustle of leaves in the breeze around them.
Nope.
Big Macintosh.
Applejack called out, trudging through one of the far orchards. The sun had already set behind the horizon, casting the sky in twilight. The mare gave a huff before shouting again.
Where the hell are you? It's getting light. Big Macintosh.
The crunch of hooves upon fallen leaves met her ears, and she turned to see Big Mac and Spitfire coming over a hill and walking toward her, trotting side by side. Applejack tapped a hoof on the ground as they approached.
And just where have you been, Big Mac? Dinner's on the table getting cold, and I'm out here looking for you instead of eating mine.
Sorry, Applejack. We just got distracted is all.
Applejack raised an eyebrow.
Distracted by what?
Spitfire and Big Mac shared a look, grinning.
Oh, nothing. We just started fixing up each other's manes.
Before Applejack could formulate a response, Spitfire continued in a smooth, casual tone.
Oh wow, would you look at the time? Till tomorrow, Big Mac.
Yup.
He watched Spitfire spread her wings and quickly take to the air, soon vanishing behind the trees of the orchard. Applejack watched her leave suspiciously, before turning back to her brother, a quizzical look upon her face.
Do you want to explain what that was about?
Big Mac wore a smug grin on his face, and he continued toward home, not bothering to look at his sister as he walked right past her, offering an answer that translated roughly to, "Wouldn't you like to know?"
Nope.
What?
Applejack chased after his retreating form.
What's that supposed to mean? Hey, I'm talking to you. Y'all get back here, mister.
There was a spring to Big Mac's step the next morning. He barely felt the nip of the cool morning air as he headed out into the orchard to gather apples. The bright, cheery colours of the leaves around him only lifted his spirits even further, and he whistled while he worked, bucking the plentiful harvest from the trees. However, the day went on, and Big Mac was still working alone in the orchard. He glanced up at the sky, noticing the sun already climbing high above the mountain to the east. At each rustle of the leaves and each breath of wind, he would look up to see if it would be accompanied by the flap of wings. When he started missing tree trunks in his attempts to buck them, Big Mac finally abandoned the task and left the orchard, searching for any sign of Spitfire. It wasn't a long search. His wanderings took him near the barn, where the sound of raised voices met his ears. Big Mac crept along the side of the barn, peering around the corner to see Applejack and Spitfire facing off against each other.
Look, I just want to know what's going on between you two.
I don't think it's any of your business.
Like, hey, it's none of my business. This is my brother we're talking about here.
He's a grown stallion, Applejack.
He may be growing up, but he's still a shy one, and I am just looking out for him.
Big Mac remained hidden behind the barn, listening intently. He felt the urge to take that step forward, to reveal his presence and put an end to this argument, but his hooves would not move.
He's real sincere, and I need to know you're doing right by him.
What do you take me for? Some undependable flake who just runs out on ponies? I am a wonderbolt.
Exactly. You've got shows to do and an academy to run. You've got to go places where Big Mac can't follow, where no apple pony can follow. So what are you gonna tell him when you have to leave him?
I...
Big Mac closed his eyes and gritted his teeth, his mind screaming at him, "Get out there and stop this." Applejack's voice dropped low and threatening.
No pony is closer to me than my brother. So don't you dare do wrong by him. You hear me? Don't you dare!
Big Mac heard the flap of wings, and when he opened his eyes and looked around the corner, he saw Spitfire flying away. He felt his legs finally start moving beneath him as he opened his mouth and cried out.
Stop this!
But the Wonderbolt was already too far away to hear him. Some pony who did hear him, however, was Applejack, who spun around and stared at him wide-eyed. The Stallion could only watch Spitfire vanish into the distance, becoming an orange speck in the sky, before passing beyond a nearby hill. Once she left his sight, Big Mac turned toward his sister, leveling a fierce glare which caused Applejack to back away a few steps.
I guess you overheard, huh?
When Big Mac's frown hardened, her tone became defiant.
Hey, don't you look at me like that. I'm just trying to look out for you.
The two siblings glared at each other before Big Mac closed his eyes and sighed. His expression softened, and he walked up to his sister, reaching out a forehoof and pulling her into a tight hug. Applejack's muffled grunt came before she grinned and returned the hug.
Oh, you big softy. This is exactly why I have to keep an eye on you.
The corner of Big Mac's lip curled upward, and he pulled her closer.
I can take care of myself.
Applejack's ears folded back against her head, and she hugged him a little tighter before they finally broke apart. They stood at hoof's length, looking at each other. A small smile crept onto Applejack's face, and she thumped him on the shoulder.
Y'all be careful now, you hear?
Big Mac nodded, turned away, and started galloping in the same direction that Spitfire had taken. Big Mac's search took him the better part of the day. He ran after Spitfire in the direction of town, asking any pony he met along the way if they'd seen her. After checking every street and business, he circled around the edge of town, but still had no luck. It was only toward the end of the day that he kicked himself as he finally thought to check the lake. As he approached the shore, he heard a familiar voice.
Spitfire, you idiot!
He peered around a thicket of trees to see the very Pegasus standing on the shoreline, hurling a rock into the water.
You stupid, lousy...
She muttered aloud, even though she stood alone. She lobbed another rock in while Big Mac watched. He stepped out from behind the thicket and cleared his throat, causing her to whip around. They stood there, staring at each other, the Pegasus pawing at the ground.
Look, I've been thinking and, well, I'm just not sure this is going to work out. I've got stuff to do, and you've got stuff to do, and it's not 'cause I don't like you. It's not you, it's me, and, oh jeez, this is sounding so trite.
She sighed and planted a forehoof on the bridge of her nose. Big Mac moved toward her and wrapped a forehoof around her, pulling her into a hug.
I understand.
Spitfire stiffened for a second, initially reluctant to return his warmth. But her muscles slowly relaxed in his embrace, and she nestled her head against his chest.
Your sister is right. You are sincere. And that just makes me feel that much worse for doing this.
She pulled away from him, taking a step back as she looked upon him.
Look, I've done something wrong here. This whole trip was just supposed to be a distraction from work. Nothing more. And then you got rolled into it, and I've never been any good at this touchy-feely stuff. So I didn't stop to think that maybe this meant more than just a vacation to you.
Big Mac bit his lip and looked down at his hooves, causing Spitfire's face to fall and her ears to fold against her head. She turned away to look out over the lake.
You know, I always used to wonder why ponies made such a big deal out of breakups. It just seems like part of a drill. You got together, you had your fun, and then you went your separate ways. No need to make a big drama out of it. I guess I thought I'd just handle it like giving orders. We're done, end of story. Shows what I know.
Silence fell between them. A cold rush of wind passed over the lake, stripping down the trees of more of their leaves and sending a chill through both ponies. Dead brown leaves, stripped of their colour and vibrancy, drifted past. Spitfire turned back to Big Mac, their manes whipping around their faces as they looked upon each other.
So, now what?
Big Mac took a moment to respond, and when he did, he leaned down to nuzzle her head.
We enjoy this.
Spitfire did not move at first, taking her time and letting out a long, low exhale before nuzzling him back.
Are you gonna be okay when I leave?
Yup.
Are you sure?
Yup.
Alright then.
Spitfire reached up with her forehooves, planted them on Big Mac's shoulders, lifting herself up so that she and he were facing eye to eye.
I've got a few days left before I have to go. We'll make the most of it.
Their lips met, their bodies pressing against each other's warmth, as if to defy the chilly wind that enveloped them. Big Macintosh took a long draught of cider from his mug before letting out an easy sigh. He looked out over the orchards of Sweet Apple Acres, its trees now bare and their branches now stripped of leaves as winter's chill came upon them. The fiery tones of the setting sun adorned the sky in front of them, reminding him of a certain mare that he had just said farewell to. Beside him, Applejack leaned back against a wooden fence post, fiddling with the mug she held between her hooves.
So, she left this morning?
Yup.
Applejack bit her lip before speaking again.
And, are you feeling alright?
Big Mac took another sip of cider.
Nope.
He paused, then turned toward his sister and gave her a small smile, communicating a different message. But I'll be okay. She smiled in return, looking down at her cider mug.
I'm sorry for being nosy. Wasn't my place. I was afraid she wasn't gonna be the right one for you. But I do want you to find the right one, Big Mac. I really do.
Big Mac reached out a forehoof, pulling Applejack into a sideways hug. She smiled, returning it.
Oh, now you're making me into the big softy of the family, ain't you?
The stallion grinned broadly and hugged his sister even tighter.
Yup.